All right, let's get into it. I'm Remington Vandergriff, licensed clinical social worker, board certified diplomat. Welcome to Bonafide and Unfiltered, the mental health podcast, a free-form forum where male mental health professionals discuss all things related to men's mental health, focusing on empirical data and both personal and professional experience, leaving behind the rhetoric. This is not just another manosphere podcast that you've come to love or hate. Depending on your lens, you may like what you hear, you may feel seen and heard, you may feel offended, but no matter what, you'll learn something about men's mental health that you'll hopefully take with you. This episode is on the topic of the cost of I'm fine, and joining me is Curtis Cox and Dr. Mike Crum, both of whom bring professionalism, dedication, and a unique lens to this topic. I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we dig in.
Go ahead, Mike.
Dr. Mike Crum, my doctorate is in social work, and I've been working in the world of mental health probably the last 12 years, primarily with military veterans. And we'll just keep it simple.
Yeah, I'm Curtis. I'm a retired Army guy. I still work with the military, but I'm a master's level licensed clinical social worker with the majority of all of my experience working with military folks as well. So about a little over 10 years, I'd say.
Good stuff. Yeah, and so by virtue of working, in the military population, we tend to see the majority of men. Of course, there's women as well, and so I think that's a unique aspect of what we do. So I want to start off with a little story that is interesting to kind of bring us this topic up and see where we go from there. There was a video I saw. It had to have been at least a couple years ago by now, and I wish I could find it again, and I would link it in here if I could, but I can't. And essentially, it was a radio show that they were doing the video of, kind of like the Howard Stern style, where they're watching him do it and stuff. And this little kid comes in, must have not been more than 7 or 8 years old. And I guess the radio host must have known that something had happened, and he'd been struggling before, anyways. And so he asked him, hey, how's things going? And he tells him that his mom had just passed away, and you can see on his face he was hurting pretty bad. And the radio host says, "Hey, so how you doing?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm fine." And honestly, it broke my heart to think, like, when did we learn I'm fine? When do men? I don't remember ever being taught explicitly to say I'm fine. No one cares, but it happened at some point. I think we've all probably said it, and we've heard many say it. But to think that a little 7 or 8 year old boy was already learning to say I'm fine, and nobody wants to hear it, was just, like I said, it was kind of heartbreaking. I don't know. Let's see what you guys think about that.
I think it's observance, right? Like as little boys or little kids, we observe other people and behaviors and language and those kind of things. So when I hear I'm fine, I don't really know what it means. I'm just going to say I'm fine because that's what everybody else does. I'm fine, but not really having the emotional, maybe intelligence at 7 to really think, you know what, I'm not fine. But like, how do I define what is fine versus not fine? This weird adult has asked me a question, and all my brain is saying I'm fine. And I think that's a common occurrence in a lot of people. It's just kind of a go-to response without having a thoughtful process of knowing what is fine or what is not fine.
And I'd maybe add that, at the age of 7 or 8, you might not have, like you said, Mike, the emotional intelligence to know whether or not you're fine or how you should respond. And there might be a lot of things that you've observed and that kind of thing, modeling. But as you get older and as time goes along, that might be a thing that we just internalize, and you just kind of do it automatically, and you come up with reasons why you do it. I can tell you personally, in my adult life, I'm not very good at it. Whenever I'm saying I'm fine, it's very, very clear through my facial expressions and my body language that I'm absolutely not fine. So I'm not that good at it with the people that I'm close to, right? So like if I told my wife I'm fine and I'm not, she sees right through that like a window.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think, the word I'm fine doesn't necessarily mean that we automatically think it's a negative thing. I can be fine, like I'm good, I'm fine, but do other people know what that baseline is for me? Right? Like, are you fine good? Or are you fine not good? Like, tell me which one, and we can go off of that. But I think we just automatically think the word "I'm fine" is counterproductive emotion somehow, and that's what we've learned it to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even like, because even the difference of, like with emotional intelligence, I think there's a lot of like being content and not knowing is that necessarily what that means sometimes, that like not necessarily mad or sad or whatever. And I think there's a lot of times where that is the case. And I know, I'll speak on like the professional side, there's plenty of times, even coming into, doing therapy with someone, especially the guys, I usually start the same way. It's like, hey, how's it going? How things been? That's the way it tends to start. Oh, things are good. Oh, things are fine. Then we dig into it and it's not fine. And it's not, it's that, like you said, that almost automatic kind of level of just saying that even when you're coming in to talk to a person who does give a shit, it's that same kind of way. You guys see that in the office too?
Oh yeah, for sure. Usually people will start off that way, with things have been going good, or no big deal. But like you said, as they start talking, they might not be unraveling a catastrophe or anything, but definitely sharing some heavy load. And but it starts off with the "I'm fine" thing. It's probably as they kind of get comfortable in the office and remember where they are for a minute and start going, oh yeah, this is where I can talk about this kind of thing. So, but yeah, especially the guys, they'll start off with the like, oh, going good, but yeah, see that for sure.
I think it's trying to dig a little deeper sometimes too. Like if I ask somebody, hey, are you good? And they're like, yeah, I'm all right. I'm good. And then it's like, are you really good? Or are you just trying to tell me you're good because you don't want to tell me you're not good? Right? Like you kind of play off of each other a little bit, especially with guys. I think for us, some of us are a little more intuitive, so we're willing to call some of that stuff out, but others are manipulative too, and we know how to manipulate some of those therapists or counselors to not be able to share those things too.
Well, it's interesting too, because I mean, think about like just the part that you just said there about like asking the question and digging deeper and stuff like that. And I know, like, going off what you said earlier too about how is it a good fine, a bad fine, like what does that even mean, kind of thing. And the person, I mean, there's plenty of people out there who their baseline is pretty like feeling awful, and that's just what their baseline is. And I know, like, I was curious with Mike. I know you work a lot with suicide prevention. How much do you see that in like someone whose baseline is just suicidal, and or just at least passive ideations and stuff like that? But so fine is just baseline, but somebody else might be scared shitless to see that kind of thought process.
Yeah, I think in terms of suicide, I'm probably more concerned with individuals that I'm more concerned with people that use, they try to think that it's okay, or they're using other, work. Like, oh, I'm going to stay at work until 8, 9, 10 o'clock because I don't have anything else to go home to, but everything's good. Okay, I got my work. Okay, well, what do you have outside of work? I'm more concerned that you're not leaving here because of other things, right? So I can tell if somebody is like they're borderline not okay, but they're still being productive in other avenues, or I start to notice the isolation, the thwarted belongingness, that kind of stuff. To where I'm a little more concerned and willing to call those things out.
Yeah.
So that we can stay.
I don't know if he froze.
Yeah, I think so.
It looks like he's in the middle of a thought. Oh, hey, Mike, did you finish up what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this may be a little kind of like off track, but when when you ask Mike about his work with a lot of people that might be experiencing different levels of suicidality, I can say, and since we're talking about the "I'm fine" thing, I can say, on my end, I've done so in POTIF, in the Preservation of the Force and Family, which is a SOCOM program. Anytime somebody in SOCOM, so that is USASOC, AFSOC, Navy Special Warfare, um, Marine Special Operations, so MARSOC, everything special operations in DoD. Um, is what POTIF covers, and if anybody is lost to suicide in SOCOM, they have to have a suicide psychological autopsy that's completed by somebody who gets trained, and it goes all the way up to the SOCOM command and the SOCOM Surgeon General and that kind of thing. When I was at Hurlburt Field, I did 3 of those. I did 3 suicide psychological autopsies. And when I overlay that with my clinical work, what I've found is that all 3 of those individuals who died by suicide had never endorsed suicidality. They did not even really exhibit, of those who had some mental health records. I can see how it was not a significant clinical concern for the people that were following up with them. And so I wondered how much of the I'm fine, and 2 were male and 1 was female. And I wonder how much of the I'm fine that those individuals, participated in. So out of those 3, those people never endorsed anything. And I'm more worried about the people who are quiet about that. Whenever people are willing to speak about it and talk about it and let you know what's going on, and you can tell that they're really serious about getting help, I'm less worried about those people, because what I've seen, based on my suicide autopsy work, is that those individuals did not say anything, and they may have been involved in the I'm fine business. I know for a fact the 2 men, they for sure, I can imagine, because you get to know these people whenever you're doing these autopsies. You talk to their friends, you interview people, you look at all their mental health and medical history. You get to kind of know them like you knew this person. And I imagine that with at least the 2 gentlemen that I had to do those autopsies on, if you would have come up to those guys at any point in time in the last 6 months or so of their life and been like, "Hey, bud, how you doing?" They'd have probably said, "I'm fine."
That brings up an interesting thing too, since we're on that topic of suicide, and especially because we look at even if we're not looking at the numbers just with our military population, 80% around is male in the country of the suicides. And what was interesting, so when I was at Fort Campbell, still active duty, we were doing just some work on suicide prevention policies and plans, things to implement, blah, 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 all that stuff. What we come up with and found was that relationship dissolution was an independent risk factor. So never been to mental health before, never endorsed anything related to mental health. And a breakup, divorce, any of those kind of things were an independent risk factor. And one of the things that we started to implement, which was not popular, was not a mandatory thing, but if the lower leader or the junior leadership had found or heard of their Joes going through some kind of a breakup, there was a group offered at the embedded behavioral health clinic for those who were going through a breakup as a way to hopefully mitigate this kind of thing. And the amount, and that wasn't just like a male thing by any means, but it was definitely a lot of, well, I'm fine, kind of attitude to that of like, oh, it's just a thing, it'll be fine, I'll get through this stuff. And there comes the part where, we have to remember that, of course, just because independent risk factor doesn't mean that the majority of people who go through a breakup are going to kill themselves, but it just means there's a higher likelihood than other stressors and stuff like that. But there was a lot of, because of course they got abused by some of the command where they were like practically command directing them, even though they weren't technically, kind of thing. And then they'd show up at the group and it was a lot of, no, I'm fine. And maybe it's hard to know.
Sure. The two men that I had the autopsies on, they were both in some stage of like relationship demise, whether they were experiencing troubled relationships with their spouses or something like that. So that definitely rings true,
and
as far as that goes.
That's where I think we need a lot of improvement, and just, as they say, just being suicide aware, because I think there's a weird expectation for men, or just this, like, okay, yeah, we go through breakups, but we kind of maybe compare like thinking about divorce. Well, you survived your first divorce, you'll survive this one. But maybe this one's different. And I'm not thinking about that the person is suicidal because I've never put them and the word suicide together. They would never do such a thing. They wouldn't do that. And then they do, and we're like, there were no signs, but you knew he was going through a second divorce. You knew they were, right? Like these things that we don't necessarily connect the dots. That's where we can be a little more maybe proactive, or just think that, okay, second divorce, somebody should probably have a conversation just in case.
And that gets into a lot. I mean, there's two parts of that, because I know that the first episode we did last year before this kind of fizzled was on stigma, and there's two parts of that too. So the one is just with ourselves, just other guys talking and stuff, and then there are certain jobs, especially of course in our military background here, like that. Like when I was in the sustainment brigade, we had the MPs were part of us, and then right next door was the aviation. Very real, legit stigma. You come in and you say, even certain levels of dysregulation, just in any other mental health thing, but suicidality for sure. Oh, you're getting grounded. You're getting your gun taken away. You're going to be maybe on the gate, or doing nothing else, and not going to get to do your job as an MP. You're not going to get to fly. And it was a very real stigma. But in other places, people would think that kind of stuff, and it really wouldn't be necessarily true. Like, yeah, maybe if you're actively suicidal and you're about to go to the field, you're not going to have a firing pin, and you might be on KP or something, but you're not going to like completely stop doing your job, at least in any of my experiences. But then that gets into like the stigma just from the other guys. Like, how many times who knows what the numbers would be, but how many times do you think an average guy has tried to say something, and then even the other guys pushed it off? Or, I see it in single dad groups. I see it in just regular dad groups. I see it in men's groups where somebody says some kind of vulnerability, and all of a sudden they're just, they're a pussy, they're weak, they're, not strong enough to handle this. They ought to do this and that. And that stigma is pretty real too.
Yeah. Well, I will use your kind of focus on people being kind of described as weak, in that kind of a context, and in groups, whether it's with other guys, like you said, little online communities or otherwise, and talk a little bit about for me, I'm fine and weak, and kind of the relationship between those things. And so one of the things that I had taken note on is, you know me. I mean, Mike, you don't know me, but Rem, you know that I'm a huge proponent in my clinical work of teaching people how to become more assertive. I think because I tend to be a very disagreeable person, like statistically, as far as like the big 5 personality traits, as a former infantry mental health provider, I tend to kind of run on the disagreeable side as a therapist versus the agreeable side. And so I like to make my patients become more disagreeable people in their life, because a lot of them are doormatted and they kind of, get themselves run over. And I like to try to help them become more empowered and stronger. Male, female, doesn't matter. I see it across the board. So one of the things that I thought of when it came to the saying "I'm fine" is this idea that if you get to a point where your emotions and your feelings about something, or your struggles or your burden or whatever it is that you're carrying is perfectly valid and perfectly reasonable, and you're just a human being, and you do tell people that I'm fine, and yourself that you're not fine. Yeah, we can talk about the socialization and all the things that kind of go into play, but that's an indication. It could be an indication of somebody who really has a problem with assertiveness, because vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability requires strength. Being able to say something to somebody that you trust requires strength. And so whenever you do, you might think you're being tough by saying I'm fine, but you might also be lacking in assertiveness, because you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable with the people that you do trust. And so I just wanted to, whenever you were talking about that, it made me connect the dots between the concept of being weak and then the concept of I'm fine. And so, that's, those are my observations on that. If that makes any sense.
Oh, for
Any
sure.
any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. It's tough because it goes to it kind of gets begs the question, I guess, of is this a top down fix or a bottom up fix? Is it a we got to get people to stop, saying these negative things to people who do eventually say whatever emotion is on their mind or show that vulnerability, or is it a we need to help people not give a fuck if other people don't want hear it or say those things and still let it out when they need to, and because that kind of goes into what the topic, the part of the cost of I'm fine. So say you do, sadly there are a lot of people who the online community is all that they have and they don't have local community to go crack a beer with or smoke a cigar or whatever. And so say you're in a group of 10,000 people in there, and you put that out and hundreds of guys, even if they do say negative stuff, there's still the chance, high likelihood, that there's going to be some people on there, at least a few, that are going to get it, and then you might make a genuine connection with, maybe have a friend that you've never actually met, kind of thing, and stuff like that. And so that, I mean, that's a pretty big cost, especially as social creatures. Whether we're introverted or extroverted, we're still social creatures. So
Yeah, I think if you look at just communication, the way that they used to teach resilience, right? Somebody's passive, assertive, or aggressive. And the whole "I'm fine" maybe seems like more of a passive, like, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm okay,
mm-hmm.
I'm right," as opposed to just being assertive and confident. I think I can be fine and assertive, but if I'm fine and more passive, I can see where that would be. Yeah, that's an interesting connection. I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah. Well, you know, uh, when you think of somebody who might be in the I'm fine and passive category, what that leads to is, over time is just resentment towards other people because they're not saying anything. They're not speaking up. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, the resentment part too. And that's, I guess, again, that's another one, see it personally and professionally, of like those overgeneralizations of like, oh, I can't say anything to anyone. I can't be vulnerable with anyone. And that's a tough one because there are times when someone walks in and legitimately, the vast majority of the time that they've opened up to somebody, whether it's another guy, whether it's to a spouse, a other parent, whatever, they've gotten shot down. And yeah, of course you can do the challenging and talking about, oh, well, is it really every time? And like maybe there is really only one or two. How valuable is it? Yeah, it might put a little chink in the armor of it's not every time, but when they do legitimately get shot down, 99% of the times that they've tried, at what point is it just natural to be like, well, I guess I'm just not going to say anything to anybody because it doesn't matter anyway. That on the 1% chance isn't worth it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done that personally before. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I guess hell with my feelings. I'm just not going to say anything anymore. That's usually when you're with somebody who's not, particularly receptive to your issues. They might be so consumed with their own. I mean, yeah, I've definitely been in situations like that before, personally, and I know a lot of our people that we work with are also in that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if this is going in just a completely different direction, but just thinking about this concept, I get more frustrated with other professionals as males
Mm-hmm.
that maybe I go to for support, but it's like the
Mm-hmm.
opposite. Like, okay, you're telling me to be this resilient, like to work through my stuff, but I know
Mm-hmm.
that you are not. Right? Like it's hard to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to put my trust in somebody, or like going to the VA or something. When I go to the VA
Mm-hmm.
and they're working up the questions to ask about suicide or mental health, and they're staring at the computer
Mm-hmm.
screen. I'm like, why would I share
Yeah.
that if you're not even
Right.
looking at me? Right? Like, I'm fine. Of
Mm-hmm.
course. Okay.
Well,
Well, that's
yeah.
good.
Well, and it seems like I mean, obviously there's nuance and all that, but it seems like there's one of two types. There's the passive clinician that really doesn't give two shits and they ask you the question. And there's the one who's going to be very, very risk averse and going to do way more than necessary because you say that you've had some passive ideations. And I mean, honestly, if a person comes in and tells me they've never had a passive ideation, I don't believe them at all. I don't think there's a person on this planet who hasn't at least at some point had some thought of, "Oh, I really wish I didn't wake up tomorrow," or they see that bus coming down the street and like, I wonder what it'd be like to step in front of that. Like everybody's had at least some level of that. And, their willingness to share is a lot of that. And I see that on, like I said, my own professionals that I go to see, but then again, these different, forums and stuff of, therapists supporting therapists or those kind of things where you just see some absolutely wild things that are said and then co-signed by other people who are supposedly professionals anyway. But then, that goes to, like you talk with the VA. It's difficult because then it's another one of those. Why wouldn't you just say I'm fine? If you're not going to get listened to or cared about, what would be the point of saying it? And then things can get missed, and it's just a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
Sure. Huh. I was going to say something about how, obviously the audience matters, the level of the relationship matters. You see this guy like once a week passing down, the hallway at work, it's, a little bit more socially understandable to just kind of walk by that person and say I'm fine. But the deeper you're in a bad way when the people that you're the most deeply connected to, you're saying that to them even, right? So, and the cost of that is, the relationship itself. You're not being very authentic and genuine in that relationship, maybe because it's this, the learned helplessness or something. When then you've probably spent a lot of time in the wrong relationship. You might be living in a like sunk cost fallacy like situation or something for a long period of time, but that was one of the things that I was going to bring up was the level of the relationship matters. So obviously I don't know somebody, I got a storm going on inside of my mind. I'm going to tell that person I'm fine because I don't know them, I don't trust them. But if you've built trust with people and you're still saying I'm fine to them, that's how you kind of know there's something there. There's a block there that you gotta figure out how to do something about, because that might not even have anything to do with that person. Maybe you've learned your feelings don't matter from other people, like your parents or past relationships or from whatever other mechanism, and you've spent a lot of time now away from that kind of dynamic with somebody who definitely is trustworthy and who does care about you, and you're still doing it with that person because you have that old baggage, from back in the day, and you got to do something to reconcile that as a person, so that you can, you know, learn to let that person, be there for you or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think it's important. Relationship building, on one hand, it seems to make so much sense, but on the other hand, it's so hard. But also, I think just being transparent. Like, although my background is in social work, right? My bachelor's, master's is all in social work. I'm not a clinician, but I still have some pretty heavy conversations with people because I'm willing to tell them I don't know something. Like I don't know what that's like. I'm not sure what that emotion is per se, or certain experiences. But I'm willing to sit here and chat with you, right? Like I know people who know people. I'd be more than willing to give them a call who've had similar experiences, right? Like the relationship building and transparency, I think, is huge, but also you build that trust by not trying to pretend you know it all, or pretend that you can fix it all. Like, I don't know how to fix that, but we'll try to figure it out, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's an important part of that, and I mean, just being willing to have the conversation in the first place, and be a safe place to talk, and people get like, I don't know, it seems to be, I don't want to say triggered, but like just the word of a safe place, as if that's some kind of like weak thing. But I think most people would understand like that there are certain places that some things aren't safe or unknown, like you said, the person in the hallway kind of thing. Like, yeah, of course you're not going to bear it all to them unless you're really at a breaking point where you just need someone to like say something to you.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
yeah,
cool.
it's
I
tough.
think it's cool too when leaders use that word. Like I had commander come to my office and he was like, "Is this a safe space?" "Absolutely, sir." Right? Like, yeah. If this is what you would like, right? So I think we need more of that too. Leaders, either using different language like that and just being open, like, hey, if you need a safe space, then we'll find it and we'll find the person that can provide that for you. So um, we need more of that kind of leadership for sure.
I've had that asked in different ways. I've had the question, how honest can I be here?
Yeah.
Right.
What can I say and what can't I say? And I go, you send it, and there's nobody in this room that's going to panic about it, and I'll tell you that much right now. So I usually spend a little bit of time, if I sense that kind of hesitancy to somebody, I spend a little time uh, just describing the level of comfort that I have playing with fire, as far as risk goes, and I won't get into the weeds with that, but yeah, I've had that question asked. How honest can I be here?
Yeah, I've definitely had that one.
So
I usually answer with the same thing, which is been doing this for about 15 years, and I've only had to involuntarily hospitalize one person. Everybody else, we had a conversation about it, and they decided that it was the best move and did it themselves. That's how I usually answer that one, and it's honest because the vast majority of the time, by listening to someone, helping them understand the risks, if it doesn't seem like it's safe, then you're able to talk to them and help them figure out that is a good,
yeah.
appropriate way to handle it.
Yeah, I had a recent one with a Columbia suicide screen, because we give that one to just about everybody. And a guy looked at me straight up and he's like, "How honest can I be on this thing?" And I was like, "Well, if you think about, walking down the hallway and some random, service member in the command telling you, 'Hey, I'm having thoughts of hurting myself,' that's a CCIR for you, not for me. My level of reporting is completely different. So you be straight honest with me there. And I tell you, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to freak out. Whatever you put on that form is not going to be anything that, intimidates me or puts me out of my depth. We'll look at it together and we'll deal with the situation. We'll come up with a plan and we'll kind of partner over that. And, so that's, the way I try to deal with those situations. But I had one of those recently, and that's what made me think of that. How honest can I be, kind of thing.
Well, and that goes back to the part about the cost of it too, because and that'll usually be a conversation in there too, where I can tell that someone is having thoughts, whether it's self harm or whether it's suicide or whatever it is, and they'll, if they're going down that like I don't want to say it, or I'm gonna say I'm okay kind of thing. We'll talk about, like, even if say we do decide you're gonna go to the hospital, say you do decide that you're gonna have to miss a little bit of work, or somebody's got to watch your kids for a while, whatever all the different second third order effects of doing this is that better than being dead tomorrow? And that's kind of that cost part of it, like, what's going to be worse, and there are some people, of course, that will answer that and be like, oh, I mean, I probably would rather be dead, and then that's a different conversation. But the vast majority of people, when you talk about, like, what's it going to cost you, essentially, is what we're saying, to not say this right now and let's go down that route, could be vastly greater than any of those figure outable things.
Yeah. I was gonna maybe slide back a little bit away from high level risk type situations like suicidality and whatnot, and just talk about just the general suffering of people, and them masking it with I'm fine. And the last real idea that I'd had really kind of contemplated or thought about was, I know I spoke about assertiveness before, but I also, when you think about assertiveness, there's assertiveness that's kind of like manifested externally towards other people in your relationships, but then there's also that self-directed, internal assertiveness too, where you're being honest with yourself. And so, if we're talking about men, not even just men, but just people in general, I think that if the I'm fine and the costs that are associated with that, which you may or may not even be able to see, um, are are a sort of a self denial kind of coping mechanism where you're trying to minimize or just not deal with something and not handle it, then that's not very strength based, and something needs to kind of come along to try to um, reinforce that. So that was just the point, right? The point that I was trying to make is that if you're using "I'm fine" as a denial based coping mechanism, that's not good. That's not going to play out good, over the long term. So the cost of that, it's kind of one of those things where it's, when we're talking about the costs of these things, the long term costs are always going to be worse when it comes to that kind of thing, whatever the health costs might be of that, hormonal burden and cortisol and heart disease and all that stuff that kind of like, because you're not properly dealing with and addressing things, as opposed to you know the fear of whatever short-term conflict might happen because you say something or speak up. We usually blow that out of proportion and minimize what the long-term cost is going to be. So when we talk about costs, that's kind of one of the things that I was going to throw out there.
Yeah, I think thinking about that.
Those are all the notes I took.
Yeah, I think thinking about that fear base too, I think we have to look at how we get information and where we get information, and our brains already naturally think negatively. So a majority of the information that we get is negative anyways. So when you think about suffering and all that other stuff, it's hard to fight that negativity and think, oh yeah, I can go and have a coffee or feel grateful or have gratitude or purpose or hope when all my brain is taking in negative information.
Yes, I saw something not too long ago. It was just an infographic, but it was linked to an actual study. But it was about neuroplasticity, and the part that was more shocking wasn't the number of thoughts we have per day, wasn't the fact that we can change our the ways of thinking and the neural pathways. It was that 80 to 90% on average is negative. Uh, and that so that means that there's some people out there, of course, dragging it up and some dragging it down. But 80 to 90% like that, I mean, I wouldn't. I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize it was that much to that point. And it's interesting what you're talking about too with the fear based part is much like things like disrespect are actually fear, but we use anger. I'd be curious to know like how many folks out there are saying I'm fine and using it as like we talked about before of saying like, oh well, nobody cares and so it's not worth it anyway, it's pointless. But really it is more of a fear of that vulnerability and fear of it happening again and all that, but not necessarily willing to address that and see that as a fear-based response. It's a lot easier to be angry at everybody who doesn't listen than it is to be scared of the vulnerability.
I think people don't know necessarily how to respond to fear. It's that emotional intelligence or the lack of, or having a plan to think about how I'm going to respond in certain situations. Think about individuals, either anxiety or post traumatic stress or others. We try to build the framework of knowing, well, if I'm going to go out in public, I know this might be a little more fear based for me, so I'm going to be careful. As opposed to I'm just going to jump right in and whatever happens, happens. Okay, well, we need some breaks at some point, right? And it's helping, I think, men or people in general of just thinking about, okay, when I do find myself in these situations that I'm starting to feel that fear, instead of fear, what are other emotions I can help minimize or reduce that to be productive? Which can be hard and complex, but.
Well, that digs into like what could really be a whole nother episode, but just the both implicit and explicit teachings of little boys that anger is like tough and strong and okay, but things like fear and sadness are weak and feminine and stuff like that. And I've had plenty of people. I don't think I was ever told that personally, but it was definitely was definitely implied in a lot of places, not just from my dad or from a teacher or whatever, but just in general, just that that era of people of other men, and then you know like I said, thinking that to be afraid that must be a feminine emotion, so then I'm not willing to have that emotion, even if that's what's causing all of these things to happen. So it's just all a big circle.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of people that don't really experience fear, and they're
Mm-hmm.
psychopaths and dead people. That's really about it. I mean, everybody else does. I mean, hell,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny because you think about an emotion like fear, or sadness, or anything like that. It's I had this saying of, and I've heard you talk about that too, the anger, and might, when you boil it down and peel the onion, it might be fear, or feeling of being disrespected, or fear of being disrespected, or it happening again,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. But I've had this saying for years whenever I've talked to guys who are highly irritable, angry,
Mm-hmm.
and usually there's some kind of historical context of maybe a trauma background, or moral injury, or something along those lines, or maybe it was their upbringing, or all of the above. Um, where we're talking about anger and irritability because that's a comfortable thing for a lot of men to talk about. They're not very comfortable talking about their fears and their anxieties and their sadnesses and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a thing that I usually say whenever I'm kind of getting that impression from a guy, and it goes along the lines of, if you show me an angry man, I'll show you somebody who's probably sad and dissatisfied with their life, when
Mm-hmm.
you kind of really get down to the underpinning of it. And that usually will open up some kind of a conversation. They'll kind of stop for a second and be like, you know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that gets to the root cause too of even just the word angry. Like, what is that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a word, but on the spectrum of anger, do you
Mm-hmm.
feel livid, white hot rage? Is your anger sadness, right? Like, there's so many ways to break that
It's
down.
like this thing I've been
Um,
working on here, all the different emotions and stuff.
yeah.
Like you said, I mean, just under anger, I've got irritated, annoyed, agitated, frustrated, resentful, bothered, indignant, upset, heated, enraged, mad, livid, seething, pissed off, furious, outraged, fuming, wrathful, explosive, red, infuriated, all that stuff. And there's so many words that people use sometimes will surprise you that you didn't even think would be a word that they use. That's like I said, that's almost this whole other episode on that. Hmm, yeah, and kind of guess on that vein though of the fear of saying something to other people, or the fear of the response that other people might have. One of the things that I like to bring with people, and I know for the folks out there watching might not have heard of it unless you've been in therapy for a while, but like the subjective units of distress, I'll talk to people a lot about, and not just in like the PTSD and prolonged exposure kind of thing, but just in life. And we'll talk about what your stress level is. So somebody who say they're whatever version of not fine, they're sad, they're mad, they're anxious, whatever it is, and not just talking about that specific one of like, okay, what level are you at, but all the other stuff going on. How did you sleep? How much is that impacting your distress level? Maybe you have a stomach ache from something that you ate, or maybe you had an argument with your spouse or your significant other. Maybe you haven't been laid in a while and you're horny. I mean, all kinds of different things. Maybe you um, are having work stress. Maybe you're having kid stress. All the different things that are going on there, and everything that's possible to add to that, plus the mental health stuff on top of it. So you start adding that stuff up, and people will say things like, "Oh, I go from 0 to 60 just like that," or "I go from 0 to 100 just like that." But you start adding it up, and like even if you just got a bunch of ones, all of a sudden you're sitting at a 6 or a 7 out of 10, was walking around daily stress, distress at that level, and so you hop off really quickly. But I think like anybody who's been in the military, there's enough pain in this world that it's the same kind of thing. You start living at a 6 or a 7 or a 5 or a 4, whatever you do, and that becomes normal. So then, what level of it there too is just saying I'm fine because that's just baseline for you. Even though another person might step into your body and go, "Holy shit, you have a lot of distress going on. How are you managing that?" But we're just going right along and we feel fine or not.
I mean, I think that brings up a good point about, different people obviously have different levels of resilience and tolerance. People have
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
practiced it, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes when people say they're fine, they are fine. They might have a heavy burden, but they might be fine. There may or may not be hidden costs, but obviously there are some people who can deal with things and
mm-hmm,
and high volume of things a lot. I mean, I mean, I'm
mm-hmm,
sure both you guys know that. I mean,
mm-hmm,
we were going through a situation where, um, we had a lot going on. This was when we were in Florida, and our dog was kind of in the process of dying. She had had multiple surgeries. They weren't going well. We had to keep taking her in. And you're talking about basically like a dog with dementia who's barking all night. She doesn't have any understanding of what's going on. She can't control her bowel movements. And so it's basically like having a little baby. Plus, you have a little baby and somebody with Alzheimer's at the same time, and we were missing sleep.
mm-hmm,
You wanted to be down there with her in case she needed anything. So, my wife and I were taking turns, sleeping on the couch, which doesn't really help your sleep very well when it comes to, having an active duty job or a full time job where you're doing what I was doing. And we were doing a lot of stuff. We had a lot of other things going on at the time, and I remember one time we were going. We had a little bit of a break, and we had some, the people that were living with us kind of like taking the wheel of the ship for a couple hours so that we could have a little bit of respite. And we went to go grab some lunch. And I remember we were walking inside, um, and kind of doing a little bit of a shakedown. And this is like weeks on end, right? This is not like a
mm-hmm,
hard couple of days. This is like weeks on end that we're doing this.
mm-hmm.
And I remember walking inside the place, and me and my wife, because my wife, so Rem, you know her,
Mm-hmm.
and we looked at each other, and I looked at her and I said, you know what, if if we were any other motherfuckers, we probably wouldn't be able to do this. And there was like a sense of pride associated with that, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
so just a point about, different people have different levels of resilience, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's not a false bravado or a fake thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they've just really developed that level of resilience,
Mm-hmm.
so, but and even then there might even still be a little bit of a cost,
Mm-hmm.
associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
You might not be fun at parties if you're like a
Mm-hmm.
terribly stoic, resilient, just hard person, like
Mm-hmm.
you might be like, well, there might be some costs associated with that too. So, but
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
interesting that you say that. Depending on who you ask, some people are fans of David Goggins. Some people aren't. He's kind of an acquired taste. But if you know David Goggins, he talks about being hardcore and that kind of stuff. And but he has this video that they looped with Jocko Willink or whatever. But he says, sometimes you just got to be that motherfucker.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, sometimes you just got to do that. So I actually have that as a
Mm-hmm.
tattoo on my wrist. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember
Nice.
what language, but it's just like a reminder to me. Like sometimes you just gotta be that
Mm-hmm.
motherfucker, and right, just. But
I think that ties too, and kind of like you're talking about there too, the cost of being more resilient too. So like I noticed that so I'll notice myself sometimes almost being like a gatekeeper of stress because I've been through so much stress. Like I think back to like 2020, dad in hospice, going through a divorce, single dad, full time, taking care of a 2 and a 4-year-old, working full time with the VA and having to figure out what this telehealth stuff's all going to be. And all that was ridiculously stressful. And I feel like I thrived pretty well. I wouldn't say that I was amazing, like the super best ever, but it went well enough. All the kids are alive, we're doing well. And I think back even to like, being deployed and, there was a good chunk of time where I was legitimately doing 18, 20 hour days, sometimes 22-hour days, not sleeping hardly at all, doing 2 different jobs, sometimes 3 different jobs with like helping other folks. And so there'll be this part of me that like it doesn't get expressed, especially not in like in a client setting, but like where somebody is talking about how stressed and how hard and all these things are, but there's a little part of me that's just like, come on, man, like come on, and it's not healthy. to think those kind of things. And that's a hidden cost of that, I'd say, where when we go through something ourselves, and we have to recognize that in ourselves too, especially if we're working with people, that will catch those things. But like that would be, to consider that fine. And that's what fine looks like here, you know, recognizing that it doesn't mean that it's fine for everybody else, or all those levels. And something like you bring up Goggins, like, yeah, he could be fine running, 200 miles or whatever his, top ones are, where having, stress fractures and broken toes and toenails coming off. I ain't doing that.
Right.
That's a fine for him. He's cool with it, but if that becomes the gatekeep of, what fine is supposed to look like for motion, that's a dangerous thing too.
Yeah, I think going back to that 7-year-old though, just thinking about the whole conversation at that point,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's it's a balance. Like I would
Mm-hmm.
get that I would have got that 7-year-old maybe into something like boxing or jujitsu or
Mm-hmm.
running, or
Mm-hmm.
like it can't just be mental. We need a better balance of like physical, emotional,
Mm-hmm.
spiritual, to be able to start letting them learn discipline,
Mm-hmm.
or emotion, or how to use that through sports
Mm-hmm.
or activity, or those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we do that enough sometimes, of trying to
Mm-hmm.
balance emotional, physical, spiritual, where we just focus on the
Mm-hmm.
the mental portion
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
That brings up one too. I had actually forgotten about this until you mentioned it. So there was two different videos that were both. One was definitely a dad. I think the other one might have been the dad, but he was also the sensei at their dojo, and they were both very young kids, like talking like the 3 and 4 year old range. So one of them, it was the siblings boxing, and the younger one started crying and was hurt because his nose got popped and all that kind of stuff. And it was such a beautiful thing to watch because it wasn't this like stiffen up that upper lip, stop crying kind of stuff. It was very much a acknowledging what it was, figuring out what was actually behind it, that it wasn't the pain, that it was the kind of the embarrassment of what happened, and it was these other feelings of shame and stuff. And the other one, I'm pretty sure it was karate if I remember right. But it was the same kind of deal. He got hit and started getting really angry and started like going off on the other kid to the point where it wasn't sportsmanlike. Pulls him over and starts talking to him. Same deal. Has a very emotionally intelligent conversation with him, figuring out what's actually going on. He's not mad because he got hit. He's not mad because the fight's not going his way. He's mad because he's not doing as well in this sport as he wants to, thinking that other people are going to judge him. All this other stuff that came up, and to see that, like, if we could get more of that, especially like I said, combined with the fact getting out there, knowing what it's like to get hit in the mouth, knowing what it's like to have a little bit of pain and still move forward with it. Because that, I think, I've talked a couple of videos that I've made before on that, and I think that's one of the things that the military teaches us that we also sometimes don't remember that everybody else has not been taught, is that you just got to do it wet. You just got to do it mad. You got to do it dirty. You got to do it sad. You got to do it in pain. Whatever the hell it is, you just got to do it anyway. The biggest part, though, I think we forget, though, is that afterwards you need to tend to yourself, whether that's mindfulness, whether that's physical stuff, whatever. But those are important, I think.
Sorry about me stepping away. The caffeine got to
Yeah,
my bladder. So,
all
We
good.
are all human,
yeah.
But
my
yeah.
friend.
But with that, it'd be about time to wrap up. I appreciate you guys, being on and having a conversation about this. I think it's something that I think most men inherently know and hear it in themselves and think about it, but I don't think the costs that we discussed today are often thought about. And what is it that you're getting out of it? Because if we look at things like from maybe a motivational interviewing perspective, we're getting something out of it. We're getting something that keeps us doing it. And until we realize that the cost of doing that, of the I'm fine, is greater than changing it and talking, why would someone change? And we got to figure out, is this a top down, or is this a bottom up, or a combination of it? But stuff like this and having these conversations, real talk about stuff, and not just a bunch of manosphere kind of bullshit stuff, is, I think, one of the first places to start there. Appreciate you guys coming on, and for everybody out there watching, we'll see you next time with another awesome topic.